Hi, and welcome to the Wonket Weekend Live Chat. I am Robin Panacchia. With me, as always, is the lovely and talented Stephen Robinson. And joining us this week is my very dear friend, Wonket contributor Sara Benincasa. You're so lucky.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much. And my cat, Polly the Demon Queen, is here too.
Yay!
She's very angry about everything, but it's an honor to be here with y'all.
Thank you.
You know,
Uh,
you and your cat and I have that in common, so great.
Excellent. I hope you also, there's product placement for a vacuum from approximately 1998, I think, in the background. So that's a good sponsor for us this week.
Yes, yes. Oh, you know what? I know that vacuum. I'm familiar with that vacuum.
Orek, anyone?
Yep, yep. Yeah, no,
um,
it's a solid choice for a vacuum.
so
But
let's hop into this while my wife's still watching. And we had these very impressive election results related to specifically abortion in Ohio, which is uh, continuing a theme. Can you mind leading us on that, Robin, of what was happening? And because you'd been covering it for us.
let me see. Sorry, my computer is or my internet is once again being janky, so give me 2 seconds.
Well, Ohio is a state. I'll just
Thank
come
you.
in with some informed info for the for
It's
the listeners, the viewers.
Okay, I'm back.
They
Sorry.
okay.
I say, yay, good news. We, destroyed all of the opposition to abortion across the land. No, not really, but close to it. Electorally, we did some good shit. Ohio amendment there, which is kind of impressive considering, it's Ohio. And Virginia, Republicans, also pretty good for being Virginia, I
Mhm.
suppose.
Well, I think this has been a pattern of many quote unquote red states. Um, Despite what Democratic consultants have been saying, and despite what they often say of like, we can only win in these states if we have an overtly anti choice candidate, because that's the sticking point. So all of our
Mhm.
more corporate friendly policies will definitely win in these states if we can just get rid of human rights support, because that's the tricky one. And on again and again, that's been proven incorrect, that it is actually that, surprisingly enough, the majority of voters do enjoy having their bodily autonomy. Even if they don't have a uterus, they're still kind of like, I know people with you. I think we should have reproductive freedom. And so those votes, when brought to the public, which is why Republicans never wanted them brought to the public,
Yeah.
despite Sam Alito's very snide comment when overturning Roe, that a lot of women journalists have been noting, of that, well, women are not without the right to vote yet. That was a silent yet. Uh,
LOL.
and women, and of course, and everyone arguably have been coming forth, except for Gen Xers. Gen Xers have been somewhat disappointing, according to the exit polls. But abortion rights are popular. And I think we've had to endure a lot of terrible candidates within the Democratic Party on the belief that this is an area that you can't be openly supportive of. You'd mentioned Virginia, but in Kentucky, the governor who won
Mhm.
re-election, Andy Beshear, was openly pro-choice. He actually, beyond, he wasn't sort of the governor of Louisiana, Democratic governor there, who just got term limited
Well,
out.
yeah.
He was anti-choice, and that we were often lectured by the very serious center right pundit types that, well, don't complain. This is the only way you can get a Democrat elected in those places, and it's just not true. Um,
Yeah, it's just not true. I think that ultimately there is a look. I think a lot of people are not particularly say, passionate about abortion. They're not going to wear a shout your abortion t-shirt. They're not going to know the details of aspects of different legislation. But there is a deep practicality to a lot of Americans at the end of the day and at the beginning of it. They want access, not just
Yeah.
for themselves, but perhaps for people they love. They honestly may not, the individual voter may not really give a crap about someone else, but they sure give a crap about someone related to them or someone who they see as an extension of them. And generally speaking, people don't want their loved ones to be forced to bear a child in a poor, or I don't mean poor economically.
Yeah.
I mean sort of a poor situation, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. You know what I mean?
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I do think that, like, I think that it actually being illegal, or not illegal, but like Roe actually being overturned made it real for people in a way that it wasn't before. And, one of the things I keep saying is that the Republicans have very much lost the, oh, but we're all opposed to late term abortions thing, because the majority of the, like, really frightening stories that we've been seeing are from people who have needed late term abortions for, miscarriages that have gone wrong, for other situations. And, I think probably one of the scariest things you can hear, you never want to hear at a hospital, the phrase going into sepsis. Like, and I think, you hear about these people who are, in fact, going into sepsis because they're not getting abortion care because their doctors have to wait. I think that's a terrifying, you know, thing for anyone to even think about for a second. Like, oh no, like, people don't like the idea of it having to go through, politicians before their doctor has a shot, like, let the doctor figure it out first. And I think, that sort of made it scarier to people, and it made it more real. Whereas,
Hmm.
like, before, it was like sort of like hypothetical, like, oh, we're never going to actually get rid of abortion, but I'm going to be a good person and vote against it, as long as I know that I can still get an abortion if I need it or if my kid needs it. Like,
Yeah, and when I was a young lady in the 1990s, and an anti-choice Roman Catholic teenager, um, setting aside the fact that when we are adolescents, we are less likely to, say, have experience with people beyond our hometown or our neighborhood or what have you. Setting aside the fact that at that age we may be less likely to know people whose experience differs from our own, but I remember that it was easy to take the position of being anti-abortion and anti-birth control, by the way. Cheers.
oh wow,
Because, well, it was easy because it was theoretical
yeah,
and because I was a child. And as one ages and you meet people whose grandmas, almost bled out in the 50s getting an illegal abortion, or people who had to terminate a non-viable fetus in the third trimester, which, and more people now, the internet is where we're employed, right? Currently. But more people are sharing their stories of
hmm,
having to get an abortion or choosing to get an abortion. So yeah, a lot of folks aren't like, don't like maybe to openly talk about it, but a lot of us have maybe heard some stories privately that we wouldn't have heard in the past. And that
yeah.
makes it more real. It makes it not theoretical.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
makes, someone that you maybe even like care about on the internet, if it, even if you don't like necessarily know them in person, it brings humanity to it. And I think that that has always been sort of what we've needed more in general, with abortion. Like, because the Republicans have always been like, you know, I think in that way sometimes better at creating the scenarios that they wanted people to picture. Like, they wanted it to be like, think of all these evil, selfish women who, just want to go out and party and, use abortion as birth control. And, they're just gonna, like, if, abortion is illegal, they're just gonna, like, wait until like the ninth month and then kill the baby. It's just coming out the,
Oh
womb.
yeah, we were showed images of that when I was a
Hmm.
child in 8th grade in
Oh wow.
catechism class. Like
Hmm.
we were shown images of a child's skull being punctured. you know, very much a baby looking child. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this was not, we were also shown images of what were alleged to be mutilated, aborted fetuses. Like, it's very, I'm so sorry I interrupted you, Robin, but like, when you were talking about that, it's the visceral response, using the word visceral in literally and metaphorically, I guess, in this case, that you have to the graphic imagery can be really strong, but then, and it's not to deny that one's emotions about that, but you know, we all have a chance now to read stories of people from different walks of life who've chosen to get an abortion, whether they regarded it as tragic or not, or painful or not, or shameful or not. And when I have a parasocial relationship with somebody I admire on the internet, and I have many, like, and I hear they have an experience that I'm not expecting to hear about, it's probably going to strike me pretty deeply.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's sort of the inverse of when Republicans argued against the Affordable Care Act before it had passed. It was very easy to scare people about something without it actually being in practice of what that would look like. They were talking about death panels or whatever. So for 50 years now, they've been selling these nightmare stories that do hit human beings. I think we understand you're not a bad person believing this. It's if you're shown like a child being what looks like a child being tortured, that is a reasonable response. And I think Republicans have always gone at emotion effectively, and with the abortion debate, especially, I think a lot of Democrats, especially at a time when most elected Democrats were white men, right? So most of the folks talking about it were talking about it from a very removed position. I think Joe Biden himself he would talk about Roe. He was very wary about actually, it was always sort of a constitutional right, almost sort of an appeal to authority to avoid having to actually support abortion as a concept. And then when that failed, and at the meantime, Republicans were actively rolling back abortion rights. That was John Roberts' thing of like, we're kind of robbing the bank quietly, and soon we're quietly embezzling abortion rights. And if you're just going to go in and bust open the bank and break open the alarms, people are going to notice. And let's not overturn Roe. We're doing pretty well on the stealth side. And I mean, and Robin's been writing for a while about how abortion access had been restricted in some states. It was very hard to get an abortion, even when Roe was still on the books. But he blew open, Alito specifically, kind of with a more radicalized court, just blew this open. So now, and you should speak to this, Robert, that people are aware of what was happening, what happens if these laws go into place, the sort of reasonable, oh, well, only the woman's life's at risk, and capable of rape and incest, all the stuff that seemed reasonable when I remember Reagan talking about that seemed reasonable. Then in practicality, wait a minute, that doesn't work, because when does a doctor decide the life is at risk?
Exactly. And, one thing that I do want to point out is I think that there was an idea for a long time that you didn't want, necessarily women talking about it because it was too real. If you had men talking about it, in this purely hypothetical way, then it was sort of more well, we can be objective, unlike women who, are emotional and are going to get emotional about this. And that's always been sort of a male thing where they think that they have the objective opinion, especially if they're white. I think that I do think that it being real to people is why, we're seeing so much of this. It's just, it wasn't before. And people didn't have to think okay, so how is we're going to make the kid prove that it's incest. We're going to make someone prove that it's rape. How are we going to figure that out? We're going to how does anyone decide, in medical emergencies, oh, wait, maybe it's not a medical emergency. Maybe we should just wait. And I don't think that people want to wait when it comes to medical emergencies.
I also think that the nightmare scenario of, and as a nightmare demon, as per, the lower third, I know about nightmare demons and nightmare scenarios, but I'll say that very broadly. So meaning anyone who is pro-abortion rights, our nightmare scenarios that we have talked about of forced birth, for children and forced birth for people who don't have adequate access to healthcare, like those things have come true.
Yeah.
The aspects, like we can engage in hyperbole and nightmare scenarios in a way that doesn't come true, right? But sometimes it's real. And no, they didn't end up having the death panels because of Obamacare, but we sure did immediately see an effect. I mean, I saw some things, affecting people that I know and love, that were frightening, like waiting in a parking lot, in one's car with someone else there for protection against protesters in Texas, waiting till the doom hour, as it were, to try and get an abortion under the wire. But what's worse than that are the stories we heard about children, little girls, having to bear a child. Like that happened. It's happening. And so sometimes even reading a story like that makes you go, oh my God, that wasn't just rhetoric. Like that can legally happen now,
Mm-hmm. I'd like to play a clip from a crazy person, if I may.
This isn't true. I'm proud to be a pro-life party, but we can win on this message. The American people are where we are, and they want common sense limitations. They want more access to adoption. We want to make sure that there's pregnancy crisis centers. These are things we can win on, but we have to talk about it. And you can't hide in a corner and think abortion's not going to be an issue.
So to quote the great Joe Pesci,
centers, because they're just so helpful. They're just, here, have a brochure on why you're a whore. Like,
to quote the great Joe Pesci, everything that person just said was bullshit.
The only Rana I trust is Rana of Rana and Beverly. No, I trust many Ranas. No, just not that one.
Republicans aren't going to back down on this. I think even in Ohio, they're claiming they're going to just sort of overrule. Because they don't believe in democracy, so that tends to how it happened. Like, democracy sort of does involve both people agreeing. Otherwise, it's just sort of, it doesn't work. The other person just uses the force. But this is not a good, like, the best thing possible would be for, I was concerned because there was a lot of folks who were doing sort of a victory lap because Biden had some bad polls last week, and they're like, even though I've been very cranky about this because everyone started questioning the polling sciences when Biden's polling numbers went down, when I recall, because I have a short-term memory, when during the primaries, we were told Biden's the best candidate because of polls. There was someone from the future didn't come in and say, oh, wait, you guys not, it was like me in a jumpsuit. Look, I had like a hat. Hey, look, we nominated Elizabeth Warren and she lost in the Rust Belt and it's terrible. And Trump has robots killing everyone. Please vote for Biden. No, it was based on polling that the Biden campaign was sharing, saying that I can look at this polls. I'm beating. So everyone was believing polls, and suddenly no one believes polls. But
your favorite, you're on record as your best friend is Nate Silver. You love everything. You write your weekly column. Stephen loves Nate Silver. That's a weekly Nate column Silver. On Wonkette. Yes, you love him.
Yes. So despite the everyone was saying, well, all those polls are crap because look at these votes and abortion and everything like that. And my concern had been that if you potentially diffuse the abortion issue, then when it comes time to vote, then people will start voting for like things like the economy, or especially, and it's always like people vote for different reasons. Whereas Republicans, it seems, are going to very graciously and generously make abortion a continued issue, because it's kind of like, as long as they are at any point, I think it was J.D. Vance who said that they want to definitely go for a national abortion ban. So if they take the Senate, hold the House, and get and Trump or Haley or whoever comes back, they will have a national abortion ban. So that actually does help Democrats to turn out the vote, because these folks aren't kidding. They were going to keep coming. They don't listen. You just saw the crazy lady just
because
say,
they're true believers is the thing. Like, we are not like, it's not like we're fighting, like the OG George Bush, who like kind of just pretended to have a problem with abortion and birth control after having been for it for many years because the Christian right came along and were like, no. So like, back in the day, there were Republicans who just kind of pretended. And now what you have are like the true believers,
Yes.
where, and especially like the strongest influences in the Republican Party that aren't legislators are also true believers. So they can't be like, oh, maybe we'll just like compromise a little bit, or maybe we won't actually try and push any of this stuff. They have to, like, not only do they have to run on it, they have to do it. And if they don't, they're screwed with, the people who will actually vote for them. But for the most part, they will lose.
Yeah.
Like,
And they were raised in it. They're
yeah.
people, a lot of them, not all of them.
Mhm.
Some of them maybe used to be more left and then changed their minds because why? But they were raised, they got too woke. It was terrifying because they understand the meaning of the phrase.
Now I have to do fascism. It's really upsetting. Like,
but like they some of them right now, I'm 43 years of age, and so people 35 and up are old enough to run for and become president of these United States. All of those people were raised in an era, they were born into an era in which this was canon. This was what you were taught from the cradle. If you are from a churched up family or not, it's there. It's in the ether, right? They were born after Republicans figured out how to make an unholy marriage with the Christian right, and then mass media. Like, none of us here, for example, I'm guessing, unless you are Time Lords, were around before that happened.
Actually, he is a Time Lord. He is.
Yeah, no, I believe that. Time Lord, huge fan of Nate Silver. Favorite author J.D. Vance, obviously.
Yes. True.
Favorite screen adaptation, anything by J.D. Vance.
Yes, exactly.
But they mean it. Like, I think that's a fantastic point. They mean it. They're not just like pulling the strings because no, they believe it. They mean it.
Oh yeah, I am old enough to recall as a child Reagan, but that was the moment. Prior to that, there were more quote unquote moderate Republicans. More Republicans were pro-choice.
Nuts. It was always like, well, we know like Laura Bush and Barbara Bush were both pro-choice. Like, it was sort of like a known thing.
Yeah, but
like,
George,
whether or not to have a baby.
George H.W. Bush was overtly pro-choice, and that changed because you couldn't get elected. But that really was when, as Sarah said, that marriage happened. Prior to that, they were
founded or contributed money to the founding of Planned Parenthood.
But I think if we get Pelosi, who, and this is again not my knocking anyone of being too old to be elected, but the problem was we get Pelosi stating things of, we need to get the Republican Party back that cared about a woman's right to choose and the environment. And it's like, well, when was that? That was like disco. I love disco, so let's bring disco back. And Republicans who support, but that's like a Whig party. That's a different political party. We need to talk about the party that exists now.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And I mentioned this last week because it was sort of every time she would come out and be like, Republicans, take control of your party. And then we went from Kevin McCarthy to Christian fascist Mike Johnson. This is the Republican Party. Like, there is no West Wing Republicans in the wings ready to assume control of the party. This is a fascist party that doesn't believe in elections, doesn't believe in people having the right to vote. And it's a very charged system. You had talked about true believers, Sarah. I think Democrats have for a very long time constantly run screaming from, I think, like really believing in certain things, especially on race or on abortion rights. So when there's a loss or a polling issue, because again, back when people believed in polls, police reform, there was a short period where people were like, maybe we shouldn't allow cops to summarily execute Black people. And then there were some polls
That
where
was like a summer. That was a good summer.
that
Yeah.
was like briefly summer, but then like there was just the cops complained, the cops went on strike, and then the polls revealed that no, you're going to lose elections unless you are kind of very pro, because the cops made it very clear that we somehow can't protect you unless we can summarily execute random Black people.
Yeah.
And so they folded on that issue, which then goes back to the concern about the Black vote, because both post George Floyd police reform failed, and then voting rights legislation failed. And yes, Black voters might be. People are always shocked by this, but Black conservatives do exist. So if the concept is that,
Excuse me, I watched Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, so I think that I, as a white woman, understand Black people in
That's-
totality.
that's
and
the clear.
Carlton
Yes.
Banks
Yes.
was a Republican. So
Exactly.
yes. I apologize for interrupting you, Stephen.
No. It's quite
Talk
true.
about Carlton, I think we can always, that's
Um,
important.
But I think Black voters, if it just seems like every election it comes back and it's like, okay, well, Black voters must come out in force for Democrats because Republicans are actively hostile to us. And same, I think they will say this about women, specifically LGBTQ community, but then they don't always govern that way when in power. Then it's all about not us. I think Malcolm X said this. It's like, we put them first, they put us last. And then next time it come up to the election, it's like, okay, well, you have to vote for us. Republicans are awful, except these are the same people that, often a lot of white Democrats and moderates, especially, would have spent the past 4 years talking about how they are their friends across the aisle and bipartisanship is so important. And we're all family. And then they come to me and say, well, no, you got to vote for me because my golf buddy here is terrible. He's awful. We go to the movies together and we're friends, but he's going to really hurt you if you let him win. And it just seems like, okay, well, you're just sort of like, are you conning me? Are you actually helping? Because otherwise, maybe I'll just vote for the party that's going to give me a tax cut, because Black conservatives do exist. There are Black people who have money who don't want a lot of the other sort of Democratic policies. And if you're not going to affirmatively support those things, then you are kind of being like, okay, well, what's in it for me?
Do you feel often in conversations around this? I'm going to use a term that gets thrown around a lot. Do you feel, Stephen, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, which every Black man in America loves a white woman to do. Do you feel pandered to often in conversations when it comes to like, well, I'm thinking about all the times people say, white people say, white progressives or liberals say, well, Black women will save us, or Black people will save us, or you find pandering comes through
with their bios that say, I vote like a Black woman. And I don't know why I hate them so much. There are so many of them, like white dudes, and their Twitter bios say, vote like Black women. And I'm like, I don't think
wow.
that. Yeah, there's so many of them. Like, I don't, that's sort of more like, it comes across as like, Black women vote like me, which is like a weird thing to say. I
guess what I'm asking, Stephen, is do you feel like you're getting a shitty sales pitch a lot of the time that you see through? This is a very odd question to ask you, but since you were talking about the inauthenticity, I guess, of like how political candidates speak to, in theory, directly to you.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's very little listening. Very folks who are on the ground. As I said, it was shocking to me. I would see a lot of white men across the political spectrum, or punditry, or white writers, who, when they saw the poll and about Biden, and this has been this wasn't just the New York Times Siena poll last week, but I've been polls since 2021 of his numbers amongst Black people not doing well. And again, this isn't like looking at, Beyonce is doing poorly amongst black. Oh, this is a shock. Oh my goodness, Beyonce. No, this is the 80-year-old. This is an 80-year-old white guy. It's not Obama. So the idea, there was this weird thing of like Obama got 90% of the black vote, and well, okay, we're good. We're going to be, no matter who we nominate, we're gonna still maintain this kind of level. And as you said, the black women will save us is usually the idea that black women are viewed as, and it's almost sort of a mammification of black women from the idea that they don't want anything, they're going to turn out and they're going to do what's um, logical. So the narrative in the 2020 primary was that didn't matter what was happening in Iowa or New Hampshire. White liberals are being silly, and white moderates were like, "Oh well, here comes sensible black people to help Biden." That was the narrative, and that helped them to make it a racial thing of like, "Oh, now we're listening to black people," but they weren't really. And if you actually broke down the data in South Carolina, the electorate in general is older, more religious. It is actually not as reflective of, and when folks noticed that, it became, oh, you're insulting all black people. So, well, it's not the case. It's just that not a lot of young black people. If you looked at the cases in states where Biden was winning amongst black people, he was not doing that well amongst younger black people in general. That's been a long sort of thing. Same with black men. And especially, I mean, a lot of the Kamala Harris support is from white, liberal women who liked Hillary Clinton and are sort of reading into their own views. Yes, black women also like Harris. And I talked to her when I talk to folks about her, but younger black men, a lot of women don't, not at the Obama levels. But there's no dialogue about that. There's no interview. There's no interest in talking to black people about this. Most publications, and I guess we can segue into this about Jezebel closing, because that was a publication centering women. A lot of publications out there where black writers, black voters, black thoughts are centered. It just isn't. I mean, and this has been a comment. I've been in this game for a while, and generally speaking, the gatekeepers are white men. I've had stuff edited by white guys who just wouldn't. Oh, well, that can't be true. They are openly sort of, and post Trump especially. So in New York, Sean Patrick Maloney had taken us when there was redistricting, and he went into a seat that once it had been held by a black man, and there was a lot of contention at the time. But then a lot of white folks did not want any coverage of that. So if you pitch this or say you want this, there's some weird tension here because he's sort of kind of district shopped, is forcing out a black representative. It's like, oh no, we can't have any coverage that. We need to be united as a party, which is usually about minorities shutting up. You have to be united. Don't talk about any of those issues that could hurt the party. And then, of course, Maloney he lost the election. And I feel like a lot of that's being repeated. So a lot of the issues that are there, we don't cover. And collectively, not even here at Wonkat, at other places, there's a lot of pressure against just covering these racial issues when they are, and there's a reason actually that Get Out is framed the way it is. Get Out, the villains aren't MAGA. I think Jordan Peele cast Bradley Whitford, who played one of the ultimate white liberals from the West Wing. There's a reason it was cast that way, and that is how when black people responded to that, because that's our first wave of condescending white assholes are often those who present as liberal, who talk about liking Obama, who talk about liking Harris, who talk about liking, here's the good black woman I like in the Congress and whatever. That is always
for Obama. I have a free pass forever.
And that tends to be the sort of that's our first race. Like, Get Out could have been just a bunch of, racist whites from, overtly MAGA racist whites from Georgia or something. And it wasn't, specifically because this idea of that, we do let our guard down slightly around these folks, and we put up a lot more because we're told that these are our allies. So this is what we have to put up with. But the level of condescension you get, I get it. I get why a lot of Black men are MAGA, because a lot of those conservative guys aren't anywhere near as condescending as white liberal men. And Clarence Thomas has written about this. I was reading his villain origin story years ago, and he talks about that when he goes to Yale. And the way that a lot of ostensibly white liberal men were treating him as if he didn't belong. And I get it. I get why he went evil. I'm just saying he went evil, and I would not go evil, but I get it. I get it totally.
Well, I would imagine that if I were a white conservative and I were therefore also a Republican, I would be fucking thrilled to see a Black guy say, all right, I'll listen to what you have to say, because I don't expect that. Whereas white Democrats, the white-led white Democratic Party, of which I've been a part for many years. Although, I'm registered independent, but you know what I mean. I always vote like Dem or Green or some shit.
Give me a second after we discuss this, because I get
sure.
Oh no.
But we feel we're sort of like we have been effectively told that we, meaning white Democrats, are entitled to expect Black support. And I read in the response, the panicked, desperate response, but oh my God, we're losing Black votes. It's not, what do we do to cater to Black people? It's a realization that entitlement is not true, but it's still it is a feeling by white establishment Democrats, some of them, many of them perhaps, that the Black vote is a slam dunk, and that there is the Black vote, that there is not internal diversity among the vast array of millions of Americans who identify as Black. So if I were a white conservative man, I would absolutely be friendlier, more welcoming, more excited to talk to my new potential Black friend about all the ways that he could succeed in alliance with what I would still regard as my party.
Oh yeah.
And because there would be like a delightful surprise, like getting a cupcake on a day that's not your birthday. And I would, and that would be sort of the level of, and so as a human, when I enter a space, just as a human being, I am thrilled if people are thrilled and warm and delighted to see me. I don't feel good if people are like, yeah, you fucking should show up.
Yes. Absolutely. And
we talk about a lot, Stephen and I, because I do feel like, a lot of the time, the fact that people like Trump is that, he tells them how wonderful they are all the time. Mm-hmm. Like, you see his rallies, he's like, oh my God, you're all so smart and attractive and wonderful. And I do feel like, a lot of the time Democrats will be like, all of you are awful unless you do the, like, it's like, oh God. Like, it's
do you love your country or not, damn it?
Like, it's very like, vote for us if you're not a bad person. And if you don't vote for us, then you are kind of a bad person. And, but what I was going to say is I keep telling the people, like everyone else at Wonket, that so many people on the East Coast register as independents despite voting Democratic all the time, because it's just a thing. And they're like, that's not a thing. And I'm like, it's definitely a thing.
Oh no, it's a thing.
Independence is a big thing. And especially in New Hampshire and a lot of New England.
Yankee culture thing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's just very much a thing. And they're all like, you are making this up. And I'm like, no. And it was like an argument when Sanders was running. And I was like, it is literally better for him to run as an independent than as a Democrat. It's just a thing. It's how people are.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I grew up in the South. I mean, and it's weird, even amongst having been around working class white folks who
Yeah.
might have Confederate flag or whatever. Still, in my time as an adult, I mean, New York and outside of New York and working in publications with white liberals are very insufferable. I don't know how to tell white men this. You are the most insufferable assholes ever. Like it is, and
I
it
mean,
is a,
yeah, and
it
I'll
is
include
not.
myself in that too. Like, yeah,
The men are worse than the.
Yeah.
Usually, my
a
issue
little
have been
worse.
my
Men are
issue
always the worst. I think that we can all, as a people, agree on that.
my issue usually has been often, and again, this is my professional career, that I owe a lot to white women who have hired me, but there's usually always there a white guy there who is their crush or their second son,
Hmm.
and it is usually like it's sort of, okay, well, it's great that you like me because I do a lot of hard work and things like great, and I just appreciate anyone giving my support, but your goof off son here is a loser, but you adore him. It's
Oh,
like it's
Jared, he's
You
so
know,
sweet.
yeah, I've worked
Jared
with
and Travis and
Fredo.
Trevor.
you just work with so many of those guys of like, what are you
Jason is so cute. I love him.
there were so many white guys I'd worked with in corporate America, especially who would get sent to learn how to be a human being school, masked as a so it was like
Training? Yeah.
it's a given that you're going to run the show more than obviously this woman or this black person, but first we need to take you to executive training, and I was actually in one of those, and it's like, you're doing so well. It's like, oh, because I never thought I would have to take a learn how to be this is all just learn how to be a human being and not a jackass class, and I just thought that's what you had to do to like stay employed at the grocery store. I didn't know that you existed in a world where you could be in your mid 30s and just be a complete social nightmare. Um, well, we've been going on this for a while. I do want to talk about Eric Adams because
Yeah.
I've written about this
America's mayor. America's mayor. Yeah.
when he won, and everyone like in the center right realm, especially, but white guy and white liberals and moderates, like he's the one, and not even like, look, like who you like. As I said, like a lot of people who like Trump, they love that guy. It's a commitment without even before he started winning elections, or it was cool. And all right, but it was like people were loving Adams because, and I remember Tim Miller at the Bulwark had written this. It was like, oh, he was so happy because it was like, look, Democrats are a responsible party, and that usually is defined as putting progressives in their place. So, they chose normal because Eric Adams, and we want to remember this when we discuss the next 15 minutes or so, is normal.
Yeah.
So Eric
Mhm.
Adams put, we chose, Democrats chose normal, the cop loving, progressive bashing Eric Adams over Maya Wally, and that had happened in Portland. They chose at the same time Portland had chosen to stay with Ted Wheeler, the mayor no one likes,
Mhm.
but they can't bear have a mayor that at least someone likes. It has to be sort of the mediocre mayor that
Yeah.
everyone kind of no one likes, and that was seen as like Democrats are being much more responsible than Republicans. But Adams, his whole claim to fame was that he was someone who just kind of wouldn't be, that was the path to
Yeah.
winning, is to insult your voters, insult progressives, and yell at young people and say cops are wonderful, and he'll become president. But he is objectively terrible. What are some of your having been in New York, Sarah, about Adams?
Well, I mean, as a fellow New Jerseyan, I'm so proud of Eric Adams for becoming mayor of our borough, New York, which is the 5 boroughs of New York are actually one borough of New Jersey, which rules the world. So, super proud of fellow New Jersey loving probable resident Eric Adams for that. He is America's mayor. He he has healed our city from 9/11, which he also retroactively saved us from. And we differ because he hates rats, and I think they're okay. But you know, Gary wrote something recently. I might be paraphrasing or misquoting, but Gary basically wrote a piece on Wonkette, which is an Eric Adams fan site. And he
It
said
is.
something, the slug was something, the subhead was like, with Eric Adams, always expect the thing you didn't expect. And that's what's fun about him. Is he taking bribes from Turkey? We don't know. Does
And
the
why? Why would he be taking bribes from Turkey? No one knows.
well, I don't
Building.
know, but it's a missed opportunity to somehow work the term Turkish delight into a New York Post headline. They haven't done that yet, which I think is upsetting. Look, I don't know, man. I'm trying to get the fuck out of New York. I love New York, but I think that Adams is a pro, to your point, in addition to being a former police officer, a very pro, let's say, police state kind of guy, which New Yorkers, I think, I obviously can't speak for all New Yorkers, nor would I ever want to, because they would be very upset, all of them, but because they're all watching. He is. There's so much to say, but I don't know, man. I didn't vote for him. I'll say that. I didn't vote for him.
He had tried to defund libraries, I believe. I'd written about that, and
He's our newest Republican mayor, and he is a king, and possibly an extension of the Turkish government. And
And the future president of the United States,
he's
because
the future
I don't want to
president
make
of the United
predictions
States
right now, but
they
No,
were
to
very
Stephen's recent point, Stephen made a point in a newsletter that we call Wonkette that when he was mommy blogging, Stephen talked about the white guys who loved Eric Adams and felt that he was the future of the party. And Stephen was critical of those people, but I still think it's true. And I still think.
Well, when he won on that platform of being pro cop and pro corporate, and all these center right guys were like celebrating as if he slayed some dragon. It's like, I lived in New York for 15 years. I lived during the Giuliani era and the 25 years that Bloomberg was mayor. It seemed like a long time, and it's like
20,000 years.
and
Yes.
we New Yorkers,
84 years,
and this idea that it was like New York is mostly this somehow very progressive. It is not. It is a lot of well-off people who like having their money protected and their poor people kept under heel. And that's the sort of mayors they've been electing since I was in my early 20s, which sadly was a while ago. So that tends to be what I mean. That when you have New York, and Sarah had written a great piece about this, where it was sort of like, it's a great time to be rich in New York, and that is actually their lead. It's a great
which
time.
I love. I think it was absolutely trolling us. I love that Elijah Shapiro at the Times did that. I was like, oh, I love when they know they're going to get us mad. Like, I love that she did that. I was like, yes, I'm rising to the bait.
But that has always been New York, of where it's like, and I was at a point in my life where I could have gone down that. I was working in corporate America. I spent my life as a lawyer, and we could have been, but we were around some not great people, because then it's just sort of, there are the folks who like, I don't want to see homeless people. I remember one guy telling me, like, complaining that it's very hard to build wealth in New York. When anyone talks about building wealth, there's a problem. And he had just won. He had gone to Vegas and come back with 10 grand. But that was like a joke. Like, it wasn't that big. It wasn't a life altering amount of money for him. It was just like, oh, my buddies went and we got drunk and we went to Vegas for the weekend, and I got 10 grand and then I'll buy this round. It's like, great. Have you considered an orphanage? But I'm good. I'll buy my own drink. Take this 10 grand to a homeless shelter or something. But anyway, there was this sort of complaint of like, there's never, because there's so much money in New York, no one ever feels they have enough. And then they will complain that they don't have enough, and their apartment is too small, and their doorman doesn't, tip the hat enough. But it's like, it is not like in New York, you're living someplace some gated community where you're so far away from poor people. It's like, well, you saw people who make a fraction of what you make at every step of the day. And you went to get your coffee and your bagel and you get to lunch. And this city only like, well, how do you think they can live? They're living in almost these old school tenement buildings, like back in the day, where you would, disease ridden tenement building. Like, it is such a horrible place to live if you are just not incredibly wealthy, and it's brutal. It's tough. I mean, it has changed a lot since I was there, when I could work in a front of house for theater and freelance write and live in, split a Upper West Side apartment for $500 a month.
$500,000.
Now it is literally.
No, that's what it is now.
That's what it is.
I mean,
that's what it is now.
Like I've lived there. I've lived there 3 times. I lived there on and off since. I mean, I've lived there thrice. Moved there for the first time in 2005. Left in 2012, and I remember at the time in 2012, I said living in New York is like digging a hole every day and throwing cash in it and then shitting on the cash and pissing on it and lighting it on fire. And I went to LA, which at the time was shockingly affordable in comparison if you knew where to look.
Yeah.
And then came back briefly 2014 to 2015 and then went back to LA 2016 to 2020 and then moved into my place in 2021. And I make decent fucking money. Like, I'm not bragging. It's just the truth. And in New York, I mean, granted, I'm also in 12-step programs for various things. So grain of salt here. But, in addition to my own issues, let's say, around addictive behaviors, setting that aside, I still make decent money. And in New York, the money that I make is, I don't know, I looked at, I ran the numbers many times and I was like, for me, somebody who walks with an incredible amount of privilege on so many levels, who makes a good living, what I consider to be a good living in my 40s as a single person with no dependents, thank God, except for a cat. It's not worth it anymore. Because I started looking at my friends who lived, and friends and strangers who lived I'm not in love with New York, and I love New York, right? I'll always love New York like a cousin. But I don't want to shit up my cousin, It's just not for me. So I can love my cousin and not have to live in a house with them and be married to my cousin. This is a great metaphor. Everyone loves it. I'd rather,
perfect. No notes.
If I was a gazillionaire,
yeah,
I would totally live in New York all the time. But
it's great. But
it's great. It's not that it's not great. It's just
you change. You're around. It's not quite. And as parents, knowing my wife and I wanted to have a kid, we kind of didn't want. We didn't want Jared Kushner to be one of his classmates. Be able to say that, that is not going to be a good scene. I shared the story with Robin, but I remember being a very boring middle-aged man, I love watching those sort of home design videos on YouTube. And there was one about this lady who lived in a 200 square foot apartment in the West Village, and she had her bed was up in the wall. She had to climb the bed, and she was just her bathtub was in the corner, and it was just very.
Was she a teacher, and her dad helped her build out all the stuff?
Exactly. Yeah, we saw
apartment therapy. Yes,
apartment there, and she's
it's beautiful, but 200 square feet.
She was a teacher, and her students, I guarantee, that's just like the room they keep their toys in, right? And to me, that's something more American than that. Of you're on Zoom during the pandemic, and you're looking, and it's like, wait a minute, my teacher lives in a hovel. That shouldn't be right. She's providing a very key mommy. This poor woman is providing a very key, benefit for me. And shouldn't she have a bathroom in a different room? That should be the basic. She's in prison. Because that's to me, it's always what separates your life from prison is your toilet is not in the set that is okay, you're in prison now. And or if you in New York, it was often have sometimes the bathroom in the hall, and it was I was very clear when I left. I lived in a dorm, and I had a I had a private room because I'm me. Um,
Single?
and I had a single room in my dorm in college, my last 2 years,
Very nice.
and but you still have to go down the hallway to the to the bathroom and whatever. And so to me, no matter how small my apartment was when I moved to New York, I was living large because I didn't have to like leave my dwelling to go to the bathroom.
Mhm.
But like suddenly it's like, so folks live like really hard in New York. And celebrities will often talk about how great it is in New York, and they'll talk, and they live in these like beautiful brownstone buildings, and then they talk about. I remember it was Gwyneth Paltrow had done it years ago, and it was just like, oh, here's my favorite little place. It's like, oh, that's because you can just walk in and get seated. I know that place. You have to wait in line 3 hours, or it's not like she just lived. You just live a different world. It's like racist heaven. It's like classist heaven, right? Like you get to heaven, it's like, wait a minute, it's still like this. It's like, God shows you to your 200 square foot apartment. Like, what? Come on! Like, no, no,
And
no.
if you're in love with New York, right? Like you're
Mhm.
so in love with it, if you're really in love with it, or you can't leave, or you could leave, but you're in love with somebody who's in New York, or you're taking care of somebody who's in New York, and you can't leave. Like I fully I I get it. I mean, New York's an amazing place, but it's also sort of like trying to, I don't know. I grew up, you know, I'm a Jersey kid. I did not grow up
Mhm.
in the city, but it obviously has changed in many, many, many different ways over the years. And I don't know, Stephen, where do you live now?
I live in Portland, Oregon.
Okay, you're in Portland and Robin's in Chicago. I'm currently kicking it in New Jersey, but often in NYC. Yeah, I mean, New York is like a just a character. I don't know. If I had generations of my family living there and I felt it in my bones, like I am a
Yeah.
New Yorker and I had
Mhm.
the ability to stay, I would stay. But
uh,
looking at it, my lifestyle, I'm like,
Yeah, it's tough. The media, especially, it's something that would often bug me about shows like both Friends and I think How I Met Your Mother would do the thing where their characters lived in these ridiculously large, spacious apartments, right? Which is
mm-hmm,
okay, fine, I get it. The camera can't actually film it if they're in the prison cell, but it'd be the moment where one of the characters would lose a job, like, oh,
Mhm.
Ross is having a bad time or whatever, or Lily has to go to, and whenever that's the case they get the small apartment for that week. It's like, oh
Yeah.
my God, they're in hell. It's like, oh no, that's what living in New York is like. And so stop, you have these folks in middle America watching these shows and think, oh, this could be my New York life. And it's not. And then
Yeah.
they get there and it's like, oh no, 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 no. That episode where Lily was in they usually have it as a very white New York, and
Mhm.
it really bugged me that I just recently saw the one where played by Alison Hannigan, Lily's character has to be in a small, crappy apartment, and there's the tubs in the room and all that sort of stuff. And of course, her neighbor's a crazy foreigner, and there's loud noise, like all the stuff that like that is New York. And there's never minorities or people who speak a different language in the palatial apartments, not even the village. Like there was no queer people on
Yeah.
Friends. They lived in like it's like just put them in
yeah,
the let's put them in the Upper East Side, but they still want to be, oh, they're so cool. They're in the West Village, and even the gay guy who works there is not actually gay. He's in love with Rachel. Like that's how
well, but to
white
be
it is.
fair, Jennifer Aniston transcends race,
Yes.
gender, class. I mean, let's talk about casting. You want to talk about Get Out casting? My version of that is talking about Friends casting, Stephen. This is Jennifer Aniston erasure. Sad.
I love
What would Nate Silver say? Your best friend?
Yeah.
yes. Legitimately, were you were you a fan of Friends when the show was airing?
I think I watched it for. I mean, I was born in 1980, so I would have been watching it in like I'm middle school and high school. I
Yeah.
think I watched it for a few seasons, and then I decided I was cool, which was untrue. And
Yeah.
I was probably just like rewatching videotapes of my so-called life, and like, um,
Yeah.
We all
the state and
Oh my God, I love the
In
state.
Living Color,
I remember the
and
state. I interviewed the guys from the state when they came to the University of
they're
Georgia.
great.
I coincidentally, the show aired entirely during my 20s. Like, it premiered the year I turned 20 and went off the air shortly before I turned 30. So it was supposed to have spoken to me. I do know that I spent many New York Thanksgivings alone watching the Friends Thanksgiving episode. And so I admit to being somewhat saddened that this Thanksgiving, Matthew Perry would no longer be with us. Hey, it's these things occur. But yes, it always how New York was depicted. Um, it's always a bummer where, like, sort of a glamorized version of something does not involve people who look like me. So it's sort of like, it's okay if it's like, all right, this is set not, a place where black people don't exist, but it's like, well, black people do live in this area, and like queer people live here, and I guess, and so,
Black
uh,
people did build this city also, so maybe they could be, and they're here. I mean, that is one thing that I will miss about New York and where I live, is that it is, in my neighborhood, it is not a there may be, I mean, I can't speak to anybody else's experience, but it is a neighborhood in New York that is integrated, so to speak. So
Mm.
where in your building, I mean, at least in my building, but you have people who look different from each other, living in the same building side by side, perhaps working together. This is not to say that there is not division in the neighborhood, but like there is, I think there is still, like, New York is incredibly diverse overall, but in some neighborhoods you do see very, sort of a segregation. And I will miss the neighborhoods where that is not the case. And one of them is Fort Greene, where I live.
hmm,
And that is not to paint a rosy picture of New York life, but like, it's weird when you are used to, say, seeing different kinds of faces, and you go to a neighborhood where that is not the case, where maybe everybody doesn't look like you, or suddenly everybody does look like you. And I know that as a white person, I've been raised that the default should be that everyone should look like me. So I probably sound like a
no, no,
Bambi stumbling around, like, where are the people of color? I'm confused. But it is,
yeah,
New York is a city where you still do get neighborhoods where people who look different and sound different might live next door to each other. Maybe they're friends, maybe not. I don't
yeah.
know.
I remember years ago, because Portland's very wide, obviously, and I was working at a coffee shop, and a mutual Facebook friend. I had not met this person, but a friend of mine through a friend of college for college, and she was from New York, and she was just like, "My God, Portland's so white. The only black person I've seen today is someone in this coffee shop on Alberta, blah blah blah." And I was like, saw her Facebook post, and I looked, I saw her typing, and I just sort of waved at her, and it's like, "Oh my God!" And it's like, yes, it's me.
It's me, local black man.
Of the
Hello.
local black person at this. But I'm also used to being, um if we could go on along, people watching don't mind if we go long for a few couple minutes, because I do want to so you'd written it for Jezebel for in the past, and other
I
places you've
did.
done,
I
and
for a little while. I had a column there
Yeah.
called The Friend Zone, which was like advice about friend stuff, which I remember the commenters at first misinterpreted to be about they were like, a few commenters were like, this is sexist. The concept of friend zoning is sexist. I was like, babe, I get it. It's not about that. It's a play on that. It's called The Friend Zone. I
No.
can't remember if I quit or just stopped sending in columns or got fired. Um I
that's
do
like,
think
Oh my God.
I do think they owed me $50. This is what we call sober time travel. So when you are somebody who is sober, in my experience, so just speaking for myself, sometimes you go to a mystical place in the past called drinking times. So I truly can't remember if I quit, got fired, or just kind of stopped sending in columns. But Jezebel was a time.
Yeah,
It is,
I was
it was very
actually
important
just
at
a
some
comment
times.
for a really long time before I got paid to write, which is, somewhat embarrassing, but I actually did like meet a
No,
lot of
I was
people I'm
too.
friends with today still
Mhm.
somehow. Actually, like my actual best friend, I would not know if it weren't for the Jezebel comments, because I was friends with her cousin through the Jezebel comments. So that's kind of bananas. But I also I never worked at Jezebel, but I worked at the Frisky, which went down years and years
Oh yeah, I wrote for them too. Yeah.
too,
Hmm.
possibly. Yeah. And I think it might have been before I was there. But like we went down around the same time that most of the other like lady sites went down. And I think like Jezebel was one of the last ones standing.
Yeah.
Bitch gone down, Bus still exists, but um I think we have Dame, and I'm so mad that Bustle is one of the ones that has like somehow survived this, because that was like started by a guy who was like, I know about women's sites. And it's just we had this. I think what's kind of unfortunate is that for a long while there were like a lot of women's sites, and there was more of a pipeline.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true.
To like I feel like we are destroying in a lot of ways all of the pipelines to being able to like write for a living, especially for women and people of color, because it's so very much like legacy everything now. um and I think that a lot of what's disappointing is they were some very good spaces, however obnoxious they did get, and we all know they did, to discuss for women to discuss feminism, women and
Mhm.
others, to discuss feminism, to discuss these issues, and to like learn other people's perspectives, which was an interesting thing pre-Twitter.
And
And
to get your first clips, get your first
yeah,
clips as a writer, as a young woman writer, where it's harder to break in
mhm.
than for
Even
a guy
change
typically.
that, like,
Yeah, I mean, I remember I wrote for at different times. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the Frisky, XO Jane,
it was double X.
Wonget,
Yeah.
Wonget, a ladies' site, a mommy blog, Bustle, certainly, Bus, Bitch, yeah, Jezebel, like, it was, I mean,
Remember the establishment? That was great. The hairpin, like
oh, the hairpin, I remember
establishment
that
was
one.
Idioma's site that she
Yeah.
started.
The hairpin was Edith Zimmerman?
Um,
And
yeah, so
Robin is the one full-time writer at One Cat. This is not to bash the idea that it is a money blog, but I do want to. That is a risk that often happens. Things become maler, whiter. It's one of the challenges. Also, when we talk about publications like Dame. I have friends who write there. Um, if that were to close, I could see where there are certain women of certain viewpoints, certainly legitimate viewpoints, but they're the ones who get picked up because it's like,
yeah.
okay, well, I need a woman, I need a black person, those are the viewpoints, and then it's like often, frankly, people like Robin, or especially if women of color who have very strong views on the things that white Democrats do not want to necessarily air, like about prison abolition or police reform and like a wide variety of things. So to go back previously, when people talk about often, and you see a lot of centrist white men talking about vote like black women and black women will save us. And it's like, you are not reading black women. There's no
Mhm.
way, like the diversity, like it, and to the point where they really want to believe that people like AOC or Ayanna Presley or whatever are some just flukes, and most of there's the good black ladies or the good black guys or the good women in general who are just sort of, I experienced it somewhat in the arts. So art sports are trying to like diversify art sports. And I was at one meeting, and when I lived in Seattle, I was on the board of a theater, and the woman who was head of development desperately wanted to get more black people on board and kind of leaning on me to sort of do this. It's like, look, I live in Seattle. I know many black people as you do in Seattle. What am I going to do? But what's fascinating was that then she's sort of like, look, but the idea was that I just don't want any drama. And
Mm.
it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, here's the crazy thing. Diversity creates conflict, not in a necessarily a bad way, but you're going to get different opinions. So if what you want is a sort of, here's the very often white male viewpoint, and it's being echoed by people who look different. So it's like,
Mhm.
oh, for this police violence or this whatever, it will, my reaction to this will be similar to what other white people might have had, and it usually isn't. In my experience, in many publications, and frankly, even sometimes here, you write someplace. Unfortunately, Rebecca has been very supportive, but the first time, everyone's kind of like, "Oh, yay, black person's writing here." Inevitably, they like, "Please fire that black guy." Like inevitably, the
Yeah.
people like, I'm cutting my subscription. I'm not giving any money until you fire this black guy for what he said. And Rebecca, said, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. But a lot of folks, like, that's the first wave of what's happening. So
Mhm.
people have to, one, be willing to support the idea they're going to be different views, because a lot of these overtly, they say they're very liberal. They don't want to hear those views. Your view is going to be different on
You
certain
want to be like, my view is the
go.
most liberal that it gets.
Yeah.
And, and also my view is exactly what all of the black women believe. Of course it is. What else would they believe? You know.
And there's also the attitude of like, well, my grandparents, I'll speak personally. My grandfather marched for civil rights. Yeah, great. What the fuck am I doing? We always have to look at ourselves and go, okay, yes, they did that. And the people in my lineage, people in my family, people in my community did that. What am I doing? And am I listening? If this person has this viewpoint, do I dismiss it as one person's viewpoint?
Mhm.
And I just don't like that person? Or do I think, there might be some other people from this person's community who share this viewpoint, and I am hearing it from one person because I move in mostly spaces where people look like me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I do think that we should all be fired from Wonkette.
Yes. Well,
I think
every one of us.
We're all trash, for a lot of reasons. It should be Nate Silver's blog.
yeah, Nate Silver.
About America's mayor.
Nate Silver is he did two things that amused me. So the first was 2016, spending that entire time insisting that despite Trump's lead in the polls, he could not possibly win because no one would ever elect someone like, he even had a book called The Party Decides. It's like, okay, well, if you want to have the party, a statistician shouldn't be writing The Party Decides. You should be writing, this is what data shows, and that this guy is like winning. Also, even your idea of what a party will elect, like there's been more racist presidents than probably Trump. Some of them like owned black people. Like that's like the history of, granted, Trump would own a black person if he could, but I'm saying there's been overtly
several, not just one. Don't talk down to him.
like a lot. Yes, he would have a lot of them.
Billionaire.
He would still find a way not to pay them, even though they're free. He just
That's correct.
He hasn't gotten in trouble for not paying people, so
but and you're from New York, like the surprise of Trump's racism, anyone who knew, again, all of the conflict at the time was a sudden shock. It's like, yes, these are a lot of white liberals who remember when their buddy Lauren Michaels would put Donald Trump on his show. He banned Sinead O'Connor for tearing up the photo of the folk, but he had Donald Trump on the show multiple times.
Lauren Michaels was always very conservative, and I thought people knew that, but
no, but the viewpoint of like mainstream white America was embracing this guy and being shocked by how terrible he was, where all black people already knew this, but no one was like listening. And
well, yeah, I mean, he made his bona fides or whatever,
yeah, I mean,
doing racist, housing practice, doing a racism.
But
you know where? Can I tell you
listen? Go ahead. Yeah.
Can I tell you where I was the night of the election in 2016?
Where were you?
At the New York Times. I was at the New York Times at a fucking paid event that I was gifted a ticket to very kindly by my friend, watching the returns come in, having themed cocktails. After watching like fucking Haberman and other people doing a Q&A on stage, watching, and in that, if you know where the New York Times is now, like, or has been for years now, but across from Port Authority in the fancy lobby, like dressed up, like, there's a photo from that night. I don't remember what photographer took it. It's fantastic. It's of people it's from the POV of the screen, people in the Times lobby with like cocktails, like looking agonized. And there is no, if you want to be shaken out of any establishment Democrat views that you possess in 2016 on election night, I would suggest time traveling and being in the New York Times lobby, and then attempting to go to the Hillary Clinton, what I thought hoped would be. I understood that Trump had a great chance of winning, but what I hoped would be a victory party. Trying to walk to the Javits Center that night with my fucking press pass, or was it? It was like a media pass from like Emily's List or something. I'm on the creative board at Emily's List, and with all the privilege that I walk with as a white woman in New York City, I have never been scared. In various experiences I've been in, maybe should have been sometimes, but I was inebriated. But in this case, never been scared in New York City, except for that night, because the amount of people who got in my face, white men, screaming all kinds of fucked up shit as I was trying to get from Port Authority to I finally gave up. I was like, this doesn't feel safe. That, like, I am a cunt, but that man doesn't know that. He just called me that, and I realized I had my like Emily's List, like Clinton, whatever, pass like on me. And I was like, you fucking idiot. And like it was not at all a come to Jesus moment, but it was like, yeah, no, this is real. This is what we thought could happen. And it did. And I wasn't in podunk hee haw. I was in racist ass New York, where that man is from.
Yeah. Well, no one took Trump seriously, and no one listened to the Black people who said he could win. Maggie Haberman famously laughed, and George Stephanopoulos as well laughed in Keith Ellison's face on live television when he said, well, he's probably going to win. Look how he's doing. And because there's this old belief that, the ideal Republican candidate is someone like Romney or
John McCain, both of whom lost.
But that's beside the point. But they're like, it's like people who still pitch the idea that Nikki Haley will win, and she wouldn't win in a normal reality. But like, what is the reality? Like, a lot of people have this idea. Well, we don't know that Trump could be the nominee. It's okay. Well, unless he dies, and I'm not wishing him death, even though I'm just saying he's immortal. And as
he is immortal, he's a god.
As Jimi Hendrix said, someone that awful can't live forever.
Like, one of the really fucked up Greek ones, that like Zeus, who's just like, I'm just going to keep turning into various animals in order to grab various
assault women. Yes.
He will eventually die. But unless that happens, how does he lose? And also, if there was a case that suddenly every white person supporting him decides, okay, let me give the other terrible, all these Republicans support the same terrible stuff, let me just choose one who's not Trump, not indicted multiple times, that Trump would do everything possible to destroy that person and ensure those voters don't turn out for them. And Republicans know this, that they know their best shot of beating. And so I've always said that it's going to be their hope that a lot of folks is that it's Trump will pick a normal VP, or there's something like Haley or whatever, and that would be enough. It's like, okay, well, he'll die and then Haley will be president or whatever. Though he'll probably pick Marjorie Greene, and then that's if we're lucky, because I feel like that would be the sort of perfect turnout engine, maybe, of getting everyone scared, including
if he picked MTG, it would be which is what we call her at the club where we all live. That would be great, but if he's smart, and he is, and he has people around him are, they will select somebody who's more palatable, and that would be like a Nikki Haley. He could absolutely get elected again. That's 100,000,000%.
He can absolutely get elected again. I have no question about that. My only I do worry that, something happens in terms of like him getting in trouble legally where he ends up not being able to be the nominee. Because I'm like, what is our defense for that? We've been really like aiming for this one. We've been preparing for this for 4 years. And if it doesn't happen, then like oops, we have no strategy. But
I don't know any legal means that will keep him off the ballot.
yeah.
And I don't know. So, but that's all speculation. I would just say based on, um, you know, I know we don't believe in polls and all that's, we used to. That's how we knew that Elizabeth Warren is going to lose all the swing states. Like, we believed in polls once upon a time. It was clear Biden was going to do better in swing states than Elizabeth Warren and even and Kamala and everyone. And there was polls, and the Biden campaign released those polls and said, "Stick with me." Joe Biden famously said, "My husband might not excite you." This was a true quote.
Just so weird.
Joe, my husband might not excite you, but he can win. You know, and
No, it's love it.
my
Like, I'm
my
sorry.
Also correct. Also
my
correct, Dr. Jill.
No, factually correct, but
Factually
also
correct.
like that's like the My Funny Valentine of
well, he's just like she he there was,
endorsements. Why
but
is
there was
it not
no,
a thing?
what was the data for that, right? Like the data could only be polls, which we're now saying don't even talk about polls, don't report on polls. Polling science is terrible. Cell phones exist and they've only started to exist in the last year. And all of this, but Joe Biden said, like, my husband excite all of you, but he can win, unlike Klobuchar or Warren or any of the others, Buttigieg or whatever, based on polls. Because she didn't, there was, Joe Biden in a jumpsuit hadn't come back from the future and said, we tried these other candidates. So I would just say, I would just advise everyone to actually pay attention to Black voters, particularly, and also Latino voters who do not have necessarily a kind of as much of a historical attachment to the
Mhm.
Democratic Party in general. I mean, look at Ron DeSantis, who was winning like I think Miami-Dade County or something like that. So there's some signs of things could go in a direction we would not like. Does not mean talking about it means it doesn't can keep it from happening. Robin called it a very waspy thing that some Democrats have of like, just don't talk about the problem and it'll go away.
Yeah, like don't acknowledge that Cubans are Latinos too.
Yeah.
And that by and large, my understanding is that Florida Cubans swing right. Is that
Yes,
that's
they
correct?
do,
Yes?
which is why like
Yeah.
it was very weird during the last election when people were like, well, we'll lose all the Florida Cubans if this happens. I'm like, we're always going to lose the Florida Cubans. We've been Florida Cubans since like that happened. They came since like, since Batista got dethroned. Like that is
It's been a
yeah.
long time since the Democrats could confidently say all these people with melanin
Yeah.
are definitely going to be fans of us. And by the Democrats, I mean the white Democrat establishment, obviously. I guess taking anybody for granted is a problem, and taking anybody for granted in this context is deeply comforting, but
Yeah.
it doesn't win elections. So what has to
Oh
happen
yeah.
is the
Yeah.
incremental grinding work that's not sexy or glamorous, that is hard, which is the knocking
Oh
on
yeah.
doors and all the fucking shit.
Well,
Or
you have
just
to actually
being
talk
nice
about
to
these.
people and not calling anyone ungrateful. Like I really want the
Yeah.
word ungrateful to go away. Like so badly. Why don't people realize that that sounds bad? I don't-
Yeah,
like,
that it sounds
vote for us, you
paternalistic.
ungrateful twits. Like that is very unappealing.
When people, what always gets me again is when somebody is like, my fill in the blank relative marched hand in hand with you, but you disagree with me. And it's like, yo, your fill in the blank relative was doing that years ago. Let's live in the reality of now. And like, why should somebody owe me or you something because your grandma or grandpa did the right thing in their era in that moment? Like
Yeah.
it's they didn't do that, like you can feel pride and joy in your relatives, your ancestors, you what have you, and doing what you feel is the right thing for that moment. But what am I doing now? What are you doing now? uh Jesus fucking Christ, that annoys me. There's just certain things that I see
Yeah,
over and over again where I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
Well, it's just there's no that sense of disconnect, not listening to minorities, reading minorities. I mean, so many liberals just don't read Black
Yeah.
writers, Black or they talk about all these Black women, but they don't read them. It's predominantly white people, predominantly white experts. That's the political dialogue. Then they're stunned. Republicans are much more in tune with their own base because they're
Yeah.
they you know the extremes, the white fundamentalists, the MAGA, they're in that world and they're listening to them and they're hearing them and they get that and they're making choices based upon that. And I think that's what still confuses a lot of mainstream Democrats because they don't get, when Pelosi talks about taking back your party, I think the implicit in that is that you'll control your base
Yeah.
as we have. And I think that's not always going to be effective. And again, and one would argue if you really, given the track record on protecting Black voters, a lot of Black voters might think, well, maybe I'll get to vote again if I am a swing. Because Republicans right now, I mean, the Supreme Court had said it's not overtly racist. You're just trying to suppress the Democratic vote, except Democrat means Black in most places. So if you're not as reliable, this goes back to Malcolm X, you're less likely to be that target.
And less likely to be taken for granted.
Yeah. I mean, you're a swing. They talk about that's why they talk about, like say, the hockey moms or soccer, whatever the suburban knights, because the idea is that, if I scare them on, queer books or Black Lives Matter, I'll lose those voters and we lose the election. They talk about that all the time. And Black people are never viewed as a potential threat. Like, what else are you going to do? So you thought about gratitude. Whenever that's like, any Black person who doesn't come out hates themselves or hates democracy, hates the spirit of John Lewis. I saw that once. And,
that's a big one. Yeah.
That just means that you're saying that Black people have no real freedom, that suburban white women have the freedom to choose to either not vote for the Republican or vote for the Democrat. And so because of that freedom, I need to listen to them and give them what they want to win these elections. But Black people, I just need to make some lip service to and show up at a Martin Luther King event or show up at a Black church just to get some tuneless white people shuffle at Black churches for elections. Sort of, you just love that. It's like Klobuchar dancing.
It's a shoulder dance that we all learn when we're born immediately postpartum. And I would like you to respect the way our people express ourselves. No, I want to recommend, before we go, I want to quickly recommend Patrice Peck, who's a great writer and young Black woman, and has a Substack that is worth subscribing to. Do a Google, Patrice Peck. I mean, obviously you should, if you're watching, be a paid subscriber to Wonkette.
Yes.
However,
give us all the money. Yes.
All the money. But Patrice does a great roundup of issues specifically related to, like, she'll do, like, it's amazing. Like, the amount of reading she does blows my mind always, but it's always specifically attuned to or adjacent to Black women's voices and Black women and femmes issues. And so Patrice Peck, great author. Just want to give a shout out before we go.
Yes, thank you. And where can people find you beyond Wonkette, Sarah?
Oh, I am at sarahjbenincasa.substack.com. Serotonin is my newsletter. And I'm Sara J. Benincasa on Instagram. And I think that is my only social
I think you left all the places.
I left all the other places. I said, I gotta go.
Well, thank you. We went a bit longer, but worth it because it's such a treat to have you here, Sarah.
Yes.
And this was awesome. Thank you. I got pissed real bad, but I would love to come back.
Yay.
Please do. Yay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Like, share, subscribe.
Yes, do all of those things.